Welcome back to Tongue of the Serpent. By now, the city has shown us haunted objects, hungry relics, false saints, and thresholds that answer when they should stay silent. Tonight, New Orleans goes darker in a different way. The power does not fail everywhere, only in the seams. Alleyways, courtyards, service corridors, those narrow in-between places where the city has always kept its oldest teeth. And in that blacked-out dark, something ancient begins speaking again, something territorial, something vain, something that remembers the city before it belonged to electricity, tourism, or the soft modern lie that every shadow is empty. This is the King of the Flies. New Orleans is no stranger to darkness. We lose power the way other cities lose patience, often loudly and with a certain theatrical flair. Hurricanes swagger in and knock down lines like they are bad suggestions. Heat waves swell until the grid begins praying for mercy. Transformers explode in bright little tantrums. People light candles, curse the utility company, and keep cooking anyway because stubbornness is one of our more reliable services. Those are ordinary blackouts. This one was different. The French Quarter's gas lamps burned steadily on, warm and golden, stubborn as old habits. Bourbon Street's neon kept humming and flickering with unnatural resilience, as though the signs had made private arrangements with physics. But the side streets went wrong. The alleyways vanished into blackness. The service corridors behind restaurants, the small courtyards you only notice when you are lost or in love or very drunk. The little in-between spaces where shadows already pool too deeply. All of them were swallowed. Light is a kind of law. Darkness is what happens when the law is no longer being enforced. People blame the electric company because people like practical villains. But sometimes it is not infrastructure. Sometimes it is theology. When the lights went out in those narrow, forgotten places, it was not emptiness that moved in. It was something old, and old things adore the places people stop looking. On Bourbon Street, nothing changed. Music still spilled from open doorways. Neon still buzzed. Tourists still swayed in little flocks with plastic cups full of optimism and regret. If you stood there in the bright stupidity of it all, you might never have noticed the city was missing pieces. But between the bright places, the air grew thick and wrong. Side streets felt folded inward. Courtyards looked like mouths with no visible teeth. Sound changed. Laughter turned muffled. Cars parked at a distance and sounded further away than the distance allowed. Even footsteps softened, as if the dark were swallowing them before they could count as evidence. Then came the sightings. A tall shape at the edge of headlights, gone when you blinked. A fluttering sound overhead where no wings should have been. Multiple tiny glints in the mouth of an alley, like eyes reflecting a light that never reached that far. The city held its breath. Anyone who lived in New Orleans long enough knew the feeling. The city is noisy by nature, When it grows quiet in a deliberate way, it means something is listening. Rumors rose at once. They started with bartenders, because bartenders hear trouble before priests do. A man at the end of the bar swore he had seen wings in an alley off Dauphine. A woman said something behind a dumpster, whispered her name, and she did not stop running until she hit a street with better lighting and worse decisions. Then the drivers picked it up. They would take people to the edge of the quarter and refuse certain turns, joking about it with the forced brightness of people who are only half joking. Smokers on back porches passed it to neighbors. Someone posted shaky video online, all blur and darkness and panicked breathing. People laughed at it for an hour, then quietly saved it. Then the words began. Mardi Gras belongs to me. I was here first. I am the king of the flies. Most locals shrugged it off at first. New Orleans is the sort of place where saints, ghosts, and old gods all end up sharing curb space sooner or later. A voice in the dark claiming ownership of Mardi Gras did not sound much stranger than half the men on Bourbon Street on any given weekend. So people adjusted the way practical New Orleanians do. They traveled in pairs. They carried flashlights. They ignored what hissed in the dark and hoped ignoring it would count as strategy. A few people got stranger. One woman began leaving coins at the mouths of storm drains, as if paying a toll to the gutter itself. Someone else started hearing buzzing inside their teeth, a low vibration that made thinking feel slippery. A drunk staggered out of a bar, pointed into a dark cut between buildings and announced, "It wants tribute," like the darkness had been texting him all night. Then he doubled over and retched, and whatever came out was not entirely vomit, and not entirely anything anyone wanted to name. That was the problem with rumor. It demanded attention, and attention was a kind of ritual. Speak a name enough times into the dark, and eventually the dark learns it has a name. By midnight, the mouth of every swallowed alley had its own little shrine. Candles trembled at curbside. Coins glittered near drains. Someone spray-painted a crude crown on a utility box. Beads were tossed deliberately into storm gutters for luck, which is exactly the sort of reasoning that keeps small gods fed and insufferable. A few desperate people even began whispering to the king, like he was a saint with worse manners. Every plea nourished him. The buzzing became louder near the blackout seams, a low, constant vibration like a living curtain. Flies gathered where there was no food. In the deepest dark, shapes nearly made sense. A narrow figure, wings suggested, instead of seen. A body the shadows were trying to remember how to build. Inside the crew, the lamps stayed lit. The shop smelled of old dust, candle wax, and the copper promise of pennies handled too often. Shelves climbed the walls under the weight of things no sensible person would bring home. Masks that remembered faces, books heavier than their paper deserved, trinkets that hummed if you listened with the wrong part of your mind. Lucien Devereaux stood behind the counter, polishing a brass key that did not seem to belong to any ordinary lock. He worked slowly, deliberately, polishing metal with the same care other men reserved for guns or wedding rings. The key was old, its teeth cut in a pattern too intricate for anything convenient. Keys, after all, are not always about doors. Sometimes they are about debts. The bell above the shop door rang, strained and unhappy, and a man stumbled inside, drenched in sweat. His shirt clung to his back as though the darkness had tried to crawl underneath it. His eyes were wild. He looked like someone who had run a very long way without actually escaping. Lucian glanced up, set the key down on the velvet-lined counter, and said, as if they were beginning midway through a conversation, "I take it you've seen him." The man nodded. "Too many times. It spoke to me. It said it wanted tribute. It said this was its city. It said—" His voice faltered. "It had wings," he managed. "Too many. And eyes. And buzzing. Like prayers made of flies." Lucian lifted a hand in a gentle, practiced gesture. "I know what it said." The man stared. "How do you know?" For the briefest moment, something old crossed Lucian's face. Recognition, the way a scar recognizes weather. The brass key in his hand seemed to grow warmer. He set the cloth aside, walked to the front door, and turned the lock with smooth efficiency. Then he checked the bolt. Not because the bolt would stop what lived in the seams of the city, but because making a refusal official has its own uses. He checked the back door too, then returned to the counter. "Because," Lucian said, taking up the key again, "New Orleans keeps its old agreements." "And him?" Lucian's smile was thin. "And him especially." Outside the shop, under a steady gas lamp, Evelyn stood watching. Evelyn liked gaslight. It flattered everything, especially people. It softened the sharpest edges of age and guilt and hunger. It made desperate faces look almost romantic, which was always a dangerous illusion in New Orleans. From where she stood, she could hear Bourbon Street laughing, neon buzzing with obscene resilience. She could feel the blackout dark swallowing the seams of the quarter, alley by alley, courtyard by courtyard. Houses watched from behind their windows. Service corridors became throats with no voices. The city continued performing normalcy with admirable commitment. But beneath the music and the drinking and the jokes about the electric company, she could feel the old patter returning. The king of flies was back. He was territorial, vain, hungry, ancient in the way rot is ancient, thriving quietly where no one cleaned too thoroughly. He had been remembered just enough to stir. Rumor and darkness had done the rest. The city had offered him exactly what he liked best: attention. Evelyn was not afraid. She had known fear in earlier centuries, when the world was younger and people built gods out of weather because clouds had not yet been properly demystified. She had long ago learned that most monsters wanted the same thing: to matter, to be acknowledged, to be seen. It had simply been a while since one tried to claim New Orleans like a crown instead of a chew toy. She smiled to herself, then stepped out of the safety of the lamp and into the blackout dark, the way one steps into a private conversation. She found him where shadow met light in Jackson Square. The gas lamps held the line, gold and old-fashioned, but beyond them the dark pooled thick as velvet. He stood just inside it, not fully made, half form and half thought. The air around him hummed with wings. His face would almost hold a human arrangement, then slide loose again. There were too many of everything, too many eyes catching the light in brief glints, too many wing shadows, too many whispers caught in one mouth. His voice arrived like silk, dragged over static. Mardi Gras belongs to me. Evelyn tilted her head slightly. Does it? The wings twitched. I was here first. She sighed. Everyone likes to think they were here first. He stepped into the edge of the lamp glow. For a moment, the illusion of a face steadied. Sharp cheekbones, mouth too wide, eyes reflecting too much. I walked these streets when the city was mud and bone, he hissed, when men bled into the river and called it offering. I'm sure you were very proud, Evelyn said. Everyone is proud of the worst error they survived. The buzzing intensified. You do not fear me? No, Lucien owes me a debt. He does, Evelyn said conversationally, but he is very annoying about paying them. The thing's voice lowered. I will take what is mine, tribute, acknowledgement, power. The city will remember my name. Evelyn's expression softened into something almost sympathetic. Mardi Gras doesn't belong to anyone anymore, she said. Not the saints, not the church, not the tourists, not even the city. It certainly doesn't belong to you. His eyes narrowed. It belongs to momentum, she continued, to the bodies in the street, to masks, noise, liquor, forgetting, to whatever keeps moving when no one is in charge. The buzzing faltered just slightly. You forget me, he said. Evelyn smiled, bright and cruel. I forget many things. It's a coping skill. She stepped closer, but never directly into his center. Her gaze stayed slightly off to the side. She would not give him the satisfaction of full witness. He needed attention the way flames need air. She denied it with the calm precision of someone who had starved many things. You aren't a king of the parade, she said softly. You're king of the neglected crossroads, the alleys people avoid, the dark they pretend isn't there. His wings shivered like paper dragged over stone. You cannot starve me. Oh, cities do it all the time. She gestured toward Bourbon Street. In the distance, still laughing under neon. No one has really noticed you. Not in the way you want. Not in the way you need. Old things hate irrelevance more than death. Evelyn leaned in slightly and placed the knife where it belonged. "You're old," she said. "Yes, very. But the city has moved on without you." And somewhere in the dark, the buzzing faltered like a crown slipping on an unclaimed head. Back at the crew, Lucian poured himself a drink. The blackout dark did not enter the shop. It pressed against the windows like a sulking child denied entry, but the interior held its steady lamplight and old wax calm. Lucian held the glass for a moment without drinking, as if weighing whether the taste would improve anything. The bell did not ring when the door opened. Evelyn stepped inside with the unhurried calm of someone who had just finished a conversation that went exactly the way she expected. "Well?" Lucian asked. "He can't be killed tonight," she said. "Not by you, not by me, not with the city in this mood." Lucian sighed. "I know. But he can be reduced," she said, "and starved." Lucian took a sip. "Annoyingly contractual. The debt is real, then?" "Unfortunately." He set the glass down. The brass key lay warm beside his hand. "He wants worship," Lucian said. "He expects the city to remember him with bowed heads and open palms. And you are not in the mood to offer him a person." "I try not to make a habit of it." He reached beneath the counter and withdrew a small, clear vial, perfectly ordinary, except for the fact that nothing in the shop was ever merely itself. Then he took a narrow strip of paper and dipped a pen into ink black enough to look distilled from night itself. On the paper he wrote a name, not any name being whispered in the streets tonight, but one from his own past, folded into neat letters like an old debt made small. He rolled the paper tightly and slid it into the vial. Then he produced a tiny brass cap and a single fly trapped beneath a thimble of glass. The insect buzzed once, furious at its sudden promotion to ritual importance. Lucian tipped it into the vial, sealed the cap, and pressed wax around the rim until it held. The fly beat its wings against the glass, a frantic little heartbeat of sound. Evelyn watched, approval sharpening her eyes. "That," she said, "is practical cruelty." Lucian's smile was faint. "He gets tribute," she said, "a name and attention in a bottle." "And in return," Lucian said, lifting the vial, "he gets humiliated by how small it is." He set the vial aside into a little wooden box and stamped it with a simple label, "For the King." Outside, the blackout dark seemed to hesitate, offended by the shape of the offering and unable to fully refuse it. Somewhere in the seams of the quarter, the pressure loosened. It wasn't gone. It was never gone. But it was forced to accept payment in a form it hated. Dawn arrived, and the blackout ended as abruptly as it began. Street lights blinked back to life. Apartments hummed. Refrigerators resumed their faithful work of preserving beer and bad decisions. People woke annoyed and blamed the electric company because blaming a utility company is one of civilization's softer pleasures. Evelyn stood near the counter, listening to the city restart itself. "He's gone," she said. Lucian swirled the last of his drink. "For now." Evelyn smiled. "You still owe him." Lucian's eyes glinted. "I owe a lot of people, a lot of things." In the corner of the shop, near a window catching the clean morning light, something buzzed softly. Small, persistent, like a fly trapped behind glass. It was waiting. Not gone, only postponed. You've been listening to Tongue of the Serpent. That was The King of the Flies, a story about old gods, modern blackouts, and the dangerous way rumor becomes ritual when enough frightened people start feeding the dark. In New Orleans, some things do not need temples. They only need a name, a little attention, and a few badly lit places to root themselves again. Until next time, mind what you repeat, mind what you offer, and remember, not every king wants a throne. Some are perfectly happy with an alley and a little fear.